David, you guys have announced a number of roster decisions today, so I'm just curious if you could kind of take us into the process, maybe some of those conversations you had this week and with those players, and just kind of maybe the thought process behind the roster that you have going forward into next year.
Yeah, so, not a super fun time of the year for any team when you're needing to tell a group of great people, first and foremost, that they don't have a future with the club is not easy. I think the level of professionalism and everything that showed by our players was commendable during the meetings yesterday. Ultimately, as I look ahead to 2026, one of the key things we need to do in order to improve the team is to create space to be able to bring new players in. It's one of the hardest things to do in MLS. When you've got contracts that are guaranteed, it's very, very difficult to then move some of those on. So we were entering an off-season where we knew we had the potential to create flexibility, and given, in my opinion, the need to improve the roster overall, that we felt like it was the right decision to only exercise 4 of those options and bring back 4 of those players, obviously still in discussions with 2 more. To ultimately create space so that now that we can focus on the next task, which is filling those slots and filling the resources that we freed up to be able to bring in new players into this team in 2026 to improve the results on the field.
Looking at it numbers-wise, 18 open roster spots is a lot to fill. I assume maybe not try and have all of those filled necessarily by the time the league kicks off next year, but majority of them. What's the process like for filling those spots then? Because I know you're handicapped with international slots and all that kind of stuff. How do you take into account? What do you see being the way that you bring in a lot of players, whether they're domestic, foreign? How does that shake out?
So I think it'll be a mix of both. Right now we have 4 international slots available based on the roster we have today. Potential maybe to get some green cards that could open up additional international roster slots. The simple answer is we're going to explore every possible avenue, waivers, free agency, super draft, international markets to fill all of these roster slots. We know we can't do everything on the international market and we can't do everything on the domestic market. So myself, the staff here, we're going to have to work really hard to identify the players. That process has already started. I've only been here a couple of weeks, but the work had begun before I arrived, and now it's for me to pick that up and take that to hopefully conclusion. We would like as many players as we possibly can for the first day of preseason. That's what any coach that we have here will demand. We're probably not going to have a completely full roster come January 10th for first day of medicals, but the goal is to have as many of those players as possible in the building so we can start to work with what will be a very new group entering 2026.
And then you guys kind of have about 4 open of the premium roster spots, I guess, between the DPs or the U22. How do you guys are in a position where you can go either way with the 2 and 4 or 3 and 3. How do you evaluate what that looks like? Which model do you think is the better one to use? And do you anticipate having those slots filled before the start of the season? I know this team this year went with 2 and 2 the entirety of the year and did not use the full flexibility of those opportunities in those premium roster spots.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've got 4. I would also say, we've got quite a lot of salary cap space as well, which can be a premium player that we can bring into the team. But in terms of discretionary investment, we've got 4 open slots to use. How I'm envisioning that right now, we've got 2 DPs with Dejan and Manu on the team. I think the team needs more quality and more depth throughout the entire roster, which lends itself, in my view, to being in the 2DP model, where you can use the additional allocation money to build depth through the 14 non-discretionary roster slots on the salary cap. But we haven't made that firm decision yet. I think we want to stay open and nimble. If we find the right designated player to add, then we will take that opportunity to ownership to get their support. But right now, as I'm looking at the team and the amount of players that we need to bring in, I do think that depth is going to be really, really important, and so probably trending right now towards being in the 2DP model for at least the start of the season, and then we can always, if we only sign 3 U22 players, which we haven't decided yet, but if we only sign 3, then you could always pivot away in the summer in case that is what we want to do. The way I look at that is I think we're trying to assess, if you're in the 3DP model, I would say, essentially you're trading what should be very, very high quality player for an additional U22 player and $2 million extra in allocation money. And so that judgment call is one that you want to make sort of every transfer window if you can, or certainly every season based on where your team is. And there'll be always moments where we might be one really important player away from, having the success that we want, in which case maybe you move to the 3DP model. But right now we're looking at the 2DP model. I believe we'll have support to fill the discretionary roster slots. We haven't gone through and had done all the exercise with ownership on that, but they've been unbelievably supportive of me, and that was part of the conversation of being and coming here. They want to succeed, and I believe if we want to have a most success we possibly can, we're going to need to try and use those discretionary slots in the most effective way we can. So we're certainly looking to bring to fill in those U22 slots that we have available right now. Probably only 3 would be my guess, so that we do have a flexibility to pivot if we wanted to. And the goal for those will be to be here as soon as they can, so they can impact from the very beginning of the season.
And David, you've only been here a couple of weeks now, and obviously a lot of decisions were made really fast after the season ended. How much of that was part of your interview process too, in prepping and saying kind of where you see the roster being after the season's over?
Yeah, so it was certainly a discussion, but I was also hesitant to, when you're watching from a distance, you don't get to know as much as you would like to be able to make these decisions. So to be honest, it was one of the first conversations that I started having with Khiry, with Mike, with the wider staff here, all of the coaching staff involved, to really assess and get their feedback on the roster. They've been working with them the entire year, and the one thing I would say is based on my review of the roster from a distance and what I found when I came here, there was pretty good alignment between us, in terms of the decisions that we wanted to make. So of course there's always 1 or 2 or 3 that maybe fall into a grey area where you have a difference of opinion. But to be honest, I would say most of the decisions were quite clear in order to free up the space to be able to go and improve the roster for 26.
And then you mentioned Khiry and Mike, and obviously you have a lot of staff to hire, analytics, coaching, all this. Where are you guys at on making a coaching hire and building out the rest of your staff?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my opening press conference, we're still head coach hire is going to take priority. We've started that process. We started some outreach to candidates. I did want to get through the player decisions first, so we could have that clarity. It's important the players got to hear from me about what their future would be. But now we move on to filling the holes in the staff, and there are, I think, as we look at analytics and scouting, I would say it's probably 2 departments that I would say are a longer term build over the next 14 months or so, because ultimately I want to be as solely focused as I can on the decisions that are going to impact January, February and March, which is the coaching staff, the staff that are directly supporting the players when they return for preseason, and then the players that we need to bring in. So that's going to be the main focus, and the work that will really start with the head coach, and then that will also allow to flow to the other decisions that we need to make.
How much does that, if at all, make the process of acquiring players and scouting players more difficult if you don't have a fully built analytics and scouting department when you're trying to bring these players in this short term right now?
It's more complicated for sure. However, I think there's ways, and we've already started to bring in some consultant help to identify some areas where we can really get some help quickly. That is not the time-consuming process of hiring people full time. So we started that process already. Of course, it would make it slightly easier if you had that right now, but I think we've got a great group of staff that have been working really, really hard behind the scenes to try and prep for what we knew would be a big transfer window. No matter who was coming into my chair, we knew there was going to be a lot of change, and so that work has already started. But I think as we build it, we do have tools. There are data that you can use that you don't need people. I'm experienced in using that data as well myself, so I can add that to the process as well.
You obviously have a lot of work to do in this transfer window, so you can have a roster to play and everything. But we've talked before about the difference between the winter transfer window and the summer transfer window. Excuse me. And this one is a unique one because it's after a local World Cup. And I'm kind of curious, just your thoughts on post-World Cup transfer windows. Sometimes we see players really increase their value and all of that, but they're being scouted for their country instead of their club and how they fit. Do you feel like you want to keep some stuff in, like some flexibility so you can make moves at that time? And just kind of how do you look at the summer transfer window right after a World Cup in general?
Yeah, so in general, I prefer, if we can, to try to use our resources from the very beginning of the season. if we wait to use our salary cap resources, they're going to miss somewhere between 14 and 17 matches. And so for me, if we can do the business that we want to do in January, that will always be the preference. It is harder in January, obviously in Europe in particular, those seasons are running, and so it is harder to get the players that you want, and ultimately we've got to get the players that we want. And if that means we have to wait for 1 or 2 players, then we have to wait. But we know the team is nowhere near ready to compete right now because we need new players. So we're going to have to make a lot of additions come January, February, March to make sure the team is as competitive as we can be from the very first game of next season. I think the World Cup's going to be really interesting. You know, I've not worked here where the World Cup has happened, so I think what we will see, I am very confident, is a whole group of players that experience soccer in this country for maybe the very first time and will be extremely interested in playing in across the US. And I have no doubt when whoever comes to visit Kansas City and sees the amazing fan base, infrastructure, facilities, we're going to have a lot of interest in our club. I think there is still a reality. We don't really want to be scouting or making decisions off players off 3 group games in a World Cup or something like that. But hopefully we've done the scouting and we've done the work in advance. So if we do still have flexibility in the roster, we can potentially pivot and try to bring some of those players in that will have interest in playing in this country once they've seen the incredible infrastructure and facilities across the US, Canada and Mexico.
Hey, David. I know you're going to be trying to fill as much of the roster as you can by, I think you said January 10th when players report. But what's the realistic number of how many players you can sign in that short amount of time?
I don't want to put a number on it because otherwise I'm limiting myself. The goal will be to fill as many as you possibly can. Ultimately, I have to be disciplined to make the right decisions. You know, that January 10th is a date that I can promise is circled on my calendar because you want to make sure we are ready to go. However, you know, we have to make the right decisions. When I look at the roster and certainly look at some of the contracts and the salary cap that has been committed here, unfortunately, that is part of the reason why the club hasn't had as much success as we all would have liked in the last few years. We have to be disciplined about the players that we want to bring in, make sure they're coming in at as many of as you can at the right value and the right time. And if that means we need to wait until January 15 to make a decision, I'll have to try and do that. There's a balance. We need a roster to compete, but ultimately, you know, I've got to try and make sure, especially when we're making commitments that might be 2, 3, 4 years, that we're really confident those are the right players to bring into the group for next season. And if that means slightly delayed than we would like, then that's what we'll have to do to make sure we get the right ones in. But we only have 12 players on the contract right now, so there are going to be players that need to be here come the start, and we're focused on that right now.
And then the coaching search, I don't, can you say like anybody has expressed interest or how many may have expressed interest to you already?
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. I think it's a really attractive job. I think people in this country and abroad recognize that this is a really attractive job. I've had an awful lot of phone calls, awful lot of messages from people. Right now, we've said that we wanted to get through the game in Houston. I wanted to assess how things worked in the first. We had 8 or 9 days of training. That was all I really had to see on the ground here. I wanted to get through the game in Houston and then the player decisions. And now that process kicks off in earnest immediately and has already started. And so conversations will start happening very, very quickly. And then we'll take that process from there. But again, we're making a decision that for a head coach who's hopefully here for an awfully long time, we want to make sure we do that process really thoroughly and get the right person in.
And then it showed that you were in negotiations with Santi, a guy who was here on loan. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, very early stages. We had a conversation with his agent this morning. He has an option. We had an option which is still available up until December 1. Ultimately, when we analysed that contract, we felt like we'd like to try and renegotiate to make it slightly more favourable to us, maybe reduce the transfer fee. So those conversations are started literally this morning. We have not reached out to his club yet, so it's just been with his agent, with Santi. Santi wants to be here. We would like Santi to stay. So now it's just the trick is trying to find an agreement that makes sense for all parties. I don't know if that's possible or not. You know, ultimately he's under contract at another club, and it is their decision from this point. But we're going to start those conversations to see if it is possible to bring him back, because I think he's a good player and has a role to fit in this team in 26 and beyond. And I really like the fact that he really wants to be here too.
Back here, David, you mentioned analytics and how much of a process that would play. In terms of filling out a staff, the first question is in terms of filling out a staff, how is that process going with the analytical department?
Yeah, so I would say right now we're not posting or looking to hire an analytics department right now. As I mentioned, we have to be so focused on decisions that are going to impact January, February, March. If we distract ourselves too much from departments, even if we were to hire an entire analytics department tomorrow, the likelihood of them impacting the decisions that we make in January is relatively small. And so for us, it's trying to use the resources that we have right now and make sure when we're building an analytics department that is a long-term investment, that we do that in the right way. And so for sure, we've started to have conversations. We are working with some consultant groups that can bring in some data support to us to help us for January. But the actual hiring of that department will probably be something that takes place over the next 12 months or so to really build it to where we want to get to.
And with the 12 players you do have on the roster, and of course others that you're trying to negotiate with, do you feel like you have some building pieces to go around, or do you feel that maybe in the construct of roster that you might have to bring in some pieces that the guys available now will have to build around?
I think a little bit of both. I think the players that I'm incredibly excited by. I think we've got two excellent DPs that have shown that they can have an impact in the league. I think John had an excellent season in goal despite the number of chances that we gave up. I think he had a good season. Jacob Bartlett, Jake Davis, both two really, really talented young players. We've got Daniel and Shappy, two wingers that I think Daniel's shown he can have a big impact. I think Shappy had a good season, and I think we can see more out of him. So I think we have building blocks in the team, but it would be no surprise to say that we're also going to need to bring in some players that we also see being here for the next 3, 4, 5 years and getting the core of the group more developed than it is right now. So there'll be a lot of competition for places next year. That's the goal, and that's going to require us bringing in some players that we believe are going to be some of our better players to help complement the group that we did decide to keep.
Going to the head coaching hire, I mean, in New York, you were able to bring in some coaches that came from outside of MLS that were able to come in and have success. Where do you value the in-MLS experience success that coaching candidates may have had versus, being able to hire guys that have been outside MLS? I mean, even looking at Vancouver with who they hired this offseason. His name's escaping me for the moment. But yeah, but I mean, it's a coach of the year candidate. How do you look and balance and see what matters maybe in bringing a coach that's outside of an MLS to work in MLS?
I think MLS experience is helpful, but it's not going to be a determinant between one candidate or another, because I think we have shown, and I think across the league has shown, that you can identify coaches that maybe do not have MLS experience. I think it's critical there is MLS experience around a head coach, whether that's on the staff, whether that's myself and the support staff, so they can understand how a roster is constructed. But ultimately, I want to find the best coach who's the best to work with the players on the pitch every single day, that can drive their development and drive performance. And we will look domestically, we will look internationally. That will be a global search to try and find the right head coach. And it's not, having prior MLS experience is probably not going to sway one decision or another.
And again, I know the first team is always the priority for everything, but the two team is also does not have a head coach right now, unless one's been hired, and has a pool of players that will need to make decisions on and bring in players so that you can support the first team. How do you work that priority in with everything else you're doing right now? I know you have a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. So those decisions, thankfully, are slightly later. So I've still got a little bit more time before we have to make those decisions. SKC2 is a critical part of our pro player pathway, and so we need to get that right. We will be looking for a new head coach and looking to bring in a head coach into that team. We have not started that process yet, as we've been solely focused on the first team. At some point, I will need to divert some attention away from first team to make sure that the second team is as set up as it possibly can. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the academy games on the weekend before the Houston match, so I got to see both the 15s and the 18s play. Couldn't see the 16s because it was the same time, but get to start to see some of the players that are in our development pipeline, which is really exciting. So there's a lot to do. First team will take focus. That is the reality. We have to make sure this team is as competitive as we can be come the beginning part of next season. But we've got to also make sure that the pro player pathway in SKC2 is as developed as it can be as well.
And then the coaching staff with the first team, there's still some coaches here. How do you make that decision, or do you wait till the new coach comes in for that hire? To make those decisions? Yeah,
a little bit of both. So every individual is maybe in a slightly different contractual position. So you try and take those decisions one by one. ultimately, you know, I would certainly, my preference would be for a head coach to be hired so they can make the decision. They're the people that they're going to be working with every single day. But if that's not the timeline that we're able to achieve, then so be it. Then we have to make those decisions. But ideally, we'd have a head coach in place so they can help to make some of those decisions on staff that might be in their staff and out of contract.
One last one, just maybe how would you evaluate the way Khiry has coached his team in the interim? And I know maybe from afar, but also in your moments working with him, what have the conversations been like about his interest in that head coaching role full time?
Yeah, I think it was a difficult job. Khiry stepped into difficult circumstances after Peter's departure. Look, the results, we finished 15th in the league. That's when nobody wants to be. But I think Khiry managed himself and managed the group as well as he could. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Khiry over the last couple of weeks. Spent a lot of time with him. We'll spend more time in the coming days and weeks as well. He has expressed interest in the role to become head coach permanently, and he will absolutely be a candidate for us because he's got a huge tenure here, and I think has a huge amount of experience that could be really valuable for us. As I mentioned in my opening press conference, we're also going to do a global search, and Khiry knows that too. But I'm excited to spend more time with Khiry now the season is done, and you're not dealing with the stress and the pressure of trying to prepare the team every day. We're going to get to spend more time together. But Khiry's opinion on the roster and the input on decisions has been super valuable to me personally, and somebody I've really enjoyed getting to know. He's clearly a top class person, and that's a really good place to start.
And David, you all announced today that you're renegotiating with Ryan Salloi. It was a very, very young goalkeeper room this year. Do you envision there being a veteran to compete with John for those starting minutes next year?
So I think the plan will be to have 4 goalkeepers under contract. We had 3 this year. My preference is to have 4 goalkeepers under contract. I couldn't say for sure whether that will be competing with John for number 1 minutes, competing to be a number 2 or a number 3 or number 4. I don't know that yet. I would also agree that the goalkeeping group was young. And so if we can find the right goalkeeper to come in to add a little bit more experience into that group, I do believe that will benefit the group as a whole. However, I do want to reiterate, I think John had a really, really good season, a really strong season this year. But ultimately, if we can bring a more experienced goalkeeper into the group to complement the 3 that are here, assuming Ryan chooses to return, then that would be something that I think would add to our group for next year.